So next we're going to stitch the tree, and it starts at the base of the tree with an encroaching oblique goblin stitch. Let me explain the name. So I'm going to start either with a waist knot to the side or an L stitch within the trunk, but either way I'm going to bring my thread up over 4 threads to take my first stitch. So that is a straight stitch, but it is, so that's goblin, but it's slightly slanted at less than a 45-degree angle, and so that makes it an oblique goblin. So all of my stitches over 4 canvas threads. I've actually mixed 2 colors of thread together. Gives a little bit of modeling for the tree trunk, maybe to look like a little bit of bark. And I do this stitch from one design line to the other. So my angle is oblique, just like the top of the short hedge, but in this case I'm doing it vertically instead of horizontally. I want to work over to my design line, coming up on the design line on the right hand side. And now my next row, I go up over 2 fabric threads just above my first row, and I come down 4, but again I'm on that oblique slant, and my stitch is going to go right between the 2 stitches of that first row, and that's called encroaching, when I bring my stitch down between existing stitches. I can almost feel where that fabric hole is, particularly on the 18 count canvas. On linen, your thread is going to push to the side a little bit more easily. And I did use a different thread for the linen, one with a little less texture than the one that I used on the canvas. Now I'm going to do this stitch all the way up the tree trunk until I reach the area of the branches. And if I find that there's a little bit of the fabric showing between these stitches, I can just go back anywhere and put in another oblique goblin stitch to cover up the fabric that shows. So again, you do the oblique goblin stitch until the trunk splits into the branches. And then you're going to do a basket weave stitch up to the top design line. So where the trunk and the branches meet, place a couple of long oblique goblin stitches right on top of the basket weave to blend the 2 areas. Now the only thing left of this tree is to do the leaves, but we're not going to do those until after the sky is stitched. At the base of the tree, we do a little azalea bush in a deep red color, or at least I chose a deep red color. The stitch itself is a diagonal mosaic stitch. It's going to work its way down the canvas in a diagonal pathway. My first stitch going over 1 fabric thread. Notice I'm just going a little above that design line, but it won't matter if you're below it. Again, the stitches are going to integrate wherever your design line is. So first over 1 fabric thread and then over 2, and I continue in this pathway all the way down to my design line. Now take a look at the chart that you have in your printed instructions And you're going to notice that wherever you have done a stitch over 2 in the first row, you will be placing next to it a stitch over 1, and vice versa. Wherever you have a stitch over 1, you'll be doing a stitch over 2 for your next row. Now you might begin to notice as I'm stitching here that I'm not completely within the design line to the left of this diagonal pathway. So even though I haven't done the entire row, what I want to mention is that to fill in between this row and the design line just to the left, you want to change the angle of your stitch so that you are coming up in an empty hole and going down in a shared hole. Here I'm just filling in between the design line. The stitches of my adjacent garden are going to come right up to these so that you won't have any of your fabric showing. Also note that some of this azalea bush is on the other side of the tree trunk. So the little stone wall at the base of the tree trunk gives an opportunity to show some thread padding. This is where several layers of stitches are used to add dimension to your work. So for the first layer, I'm going to do some horizontal stitches, and I'm going to place them just inside my design line. I'm only going to do 2 layers in this particular example. So for this little stone, again inside my design line, I'm doing a layer of horizontal stitches. Now for my second and top layer, I'm going to do diagonal stitches, going from one design line to the other. I like to do diagonal stitches as a top layer because I think they give better coverage than either a horizontal or vertical stitch. I could have done 3 layers. So for example, I could have started with a vertical layer and then done a horizontal layer followed by my diagonal layer. Again, this gives a little bit of dimension to your work. And I like to use it for rocks. You can use it for various kinds of things where you want dimension. Now, to distinguish one of these little stones from another, I can change angle. So I'm almost finished this first one. And for my second one, again, I would do horizontal stitches. I could do vertical, either way. For my bottom layer, again, I'm inside the design line. But this time, I'm just going to change the angle of my top stitch. And as I said before, that just helps distinguish one stone from another. Sometimes you can use an over-dye thread. The ones that I use for linen and canvas are over-dye, so they give a little bit of color change as you do your stitching. And that just adds interest to your work.